Have you ever wondered if the chains that bind us are forged not only by our choices, but also by the very blood that courses through our veins? Imagine a life where destiny is written long before your first breath. A life where the whispers of ancient sins echo in every heartbeat. Spain's tragic princess, born into a royal lineage marred by secrets and shadowed by inbreeding, was destined to live a life where love, duty, and despair collided in a relentless struggle. Can a soul truly be free when every fiber of its being is predetermined by a legacy of sorrow? Let us journey together into the heart of this mystery, exploring the dark corridors of a mind shaped by destiny and the unforgiving weight of a family curse. In the quiet corridors of history, amid the echoing footsteps of ancient halls, there exists a story both haunting and mesmerizing. A story of a princess whose life was marred by the burden of an ancestral curse. Born into a realm where the very fabric of existence was interwoven with secrets, tradition, and the dark implications of inbreeding, she came to be known as Spain's inbred princess. Her life, a tapestry of tragedy and psychological turmoil, offers us a rare glimpse into how the interplay of genetics, societal expectation, and the weight of history can shape the soul of one individual. This narrative is not merely a recount of royal mishaps or scandal. It is an intimate psychological history, a journey through the fragile mind of a girl who was never allowed the luxury of a normal childhood. It is a journey that traces her evolution from an innocent child to a conflicted, isolated, and ultimately tragic figure. As we traverse the landscape of her memories, dreams, and nightmares, we will ask the uncomfortable question: to what extent is our destiny pre-written by the sins of our forebears?
Let's start the journey now.
In a lavish palace hidden amidst the rolling hills of Spain, where opulent rooms bore witness to centuries of royalty, the air was thick with both expectation and foreboding. The princess was born on a cold winter night, a night that seemed to whisper secrets of the past and portend a future filled with sorrow. Her birth was a celebrated event among the nobility, yet it was overshadowed by murmurs about the purity of the bloodline and the disturbing practice of close-kin marriages that had become a grim tradition in the royal family. From her first cry, it was evident that the princess was unlike any other child. Her large, luminous eyes carried a depth of sorrow and awareness that belied her tender age. The midwives, seasoned in the rituals of royal births, could not help but exchange uneasy glances as they noted the stark contrast between her fragile appearance and the heavy expectations placed upon her. In hushed tones, they spoke of the curse that seemed to hover over her lineage, a curse born of isolation, repeated unions within the family, and the accumulation of centuries-old genetic burdens. Her early days were marked by a delicate balance of celebration and silent dread. The royal court, with all its grandeur, masked a deep-seated anxiety, for beneath the shimmering gowns and glittering chandeliers lay a history of tragedies. Stories of mental instability, premature deaths, and the slow decay of a once mighty dynasty. The princess, in her innocence, was unaware of these whispers, yet the seeds of her future torment were sown at birth.
Let's examine her childhood trauma and the burden of heritage.
As the princess grew, so too did the invisible chains that bound her to a legacy of despair. Her childhood, far from the carefree days enjoyed by other children, was a series of strict protocols, rigorous lessons in etiquette, and constant reminders of the heavy crown she was destined to wear. Every day was a lesson in duty, a relentless schedule of education, court appearances, and ceremonies that left little room for the joys of youth. Within the cold marble walls of the palace, the princess experienced an emotional isolation that was as profound as it was unintentional. Her caretakers, though well-meaning, could not offer the warmth and understanding that a child craved. Instead, they drilled into her the importance of tradition and the weight of a family legacy that had long been tainted by the practice of inbreeding. This legacy, whispered about in the shadowy recesses of the palace, was an ever-present reminder of the genetic errors that had left their mark on the royal line. The young princess was acutely aware, even if subconsciously, of the fragility of her existence. Every stern look from a governess, Every whispered comment from a servant reinforced the idea that she was not entirely like other children. Her differences, both physical and psychological, became a silent burden, a burden that she carried with a mixture of resignation and an emerging inner rebellion. In the quiet moments of solitude, she would stare out of her window, lost in thought, questioning why she was born into a world that promised both grandeur and inevitable sorrow. The psychological impact of her upbringing was profound. With every lesson in royal decorum, a piece of her individuality was sacrificed on the altar of duty. The strict regime left little space for self-expression or the nurturing of a personal identity. Instead, the princess learned early on that her life was not her own, that every thought, every feeling, was to be filtered through the lens of royal expectations and a cursed legacy. The constant reminder of her inbred heritage planted a seed of self-doubt and alienation, making her question if she would ever be free from the confines of a predetermined fate.
Let's dive into her adolescence and the search for identity.
As the years passed, the princess entered the tumultuous phase of adolescence, a period marked by both physical change and intense emotional upheaval. The strict boundaries of her childhood began to chafe against her emerging desire for self-discovery. With the onset of puberty came a flood of conflicting emotions, a yearning for freedom, the blossoming of romantic thoughts, and the painful awareness of her own differences. In the solitude of her private chambers, the princess began to explore the depths of her mind. She questioned the rigid rules that governed her existence and wondered if there was more to life than the cold routines of royal protocol. Her inner world became a battleground where the ideals of duty clashed with the desire for personal freedom. The quiet rebellion that had taken root in her childhood now grew into a raging storm of questions and defiance. One of the most painful aspects of her adolescence was the realization that her family's legacy was as much a prison as it was a source of pride. The whispers of inbreeding and the resulting physical and mental ailments that plagued her ancestors were not just distant rumors. They were an inescapable part of her own identity. In the mirror, she saw the subtle signs of this legacy: a fragile constitution, an intensity in her gaze that spoke of inner torment, and a beauty tinged with sorrow. Each day the princess grappled with the duality of her existence, the public face of a royal destined to lead, and the private self tormented by the knowledge of her cursed heritage. The isolation she felt was compounded by the constant comparisons with her peers, other noble children who appeared to possess the lightness of spirit that she so desperately lacked. Instead of playful innocence, her days were filled with lessons in restraint and decorum, leaving little room for the exploration of her true self. Her longing for genuine human connection was met with cold formality and the unyielding expectations of a royal life. As she sat in the dim glow of candlelight, journaling her innermost thoughts, she often wondered if she was destined to forever walk the line between duty and despair. Despite the overwhelming sense of isolation, there were fleeting moments when the princess experienced a spark of hope, a brief glimpse of what life could be if only she were free to choose her own path. In secret, she read forbidden books and listened to the whispered stories of rebels and revolutionaries who dared to dream of a life beyond the gilded cage. These clandestine moments of intellectual freedom fueled a quiet, yet persistent, inner revolution. She began to see the possibility of transcending the chains of her past, even as the shadow of her lineage loomed large over every thought and emotion.
Let's give account of how she struggled with duty and desire.
The struggle between duty and desire reached a fevered pitch as the princess matured. On one hand, she was expected to embrace the responsibilities of her station, a role that demanded sacrifice, decorum, and unwavering loyalty to a family that had, for generations, maintained power through tradition and taboo. On the other hand, her heart longed for the simple pleasures of life, genuine affection, the freedom to make mistakes, and the chance to love without the constant specter of judgment. Royal duties were relentless. Ceremonies, diplomatic visits, and endless engagements left little time for introspection or the nurturing of personal dreams. Every smile she offered at a state banquet, every graceful bow at a public appearance, was a reminder of the mask she was forced to wear. Beneath that mask, however, lay a torrent of emotions, a mixture of anger, grief, and an overwhelming sense of entrapment. The princess felt as though she were living a lie, forced to adhere to traditions that had long since lost their meaning in the modern world. Her personal relationships were equally fraught with tension. Arranged marriages, designed to strengthen political alliances, were a constant reminder that love was a luxury that her status could rarely afford. The whispers of disapproval from the court, combined with the ever-present reminder of her inbred heritage, made it nearly impossible to form genuine, intimate connections. Every affectionate glance was tinged with suspicion, and every kind word seemed to carry the weight of expectation and duty. In the quiet hours of the night, when the palace was silent and the stars shone like distant beacons of hope, the princess would often lie awake, questioning the sacrifices demanded of her. Was it possible to reconcile her duty to her family with her own desperate need for love and acceptance? Could she ever break free from the chains of tradition and forge a life that was truly her own? These questions haunted her, fueling a growing inner conflict that threatened to shatter her already fragile sense of self. The struggle was not only external but deeply internal. Every decision she made was overshadowed by the legacy of her ancestry, a legacy that seemed to dictate her fate before she had even taken her first breath. The constant tension between what was expected and what she desired led to a crisis of identity. In moments of quiet introspection, she would ask herself, "Am I the daughter of a proud royal lineage, or am I simply a victim of a genetic curse?" This question, repeated over and over in the silent chambers of her heart, was both a source of anguish and a catalyst for her inner transformation.
Let's talk about the psychological dissent she encountered.
The psychological descent of Spain's princess began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It started with sleepless nights filled with restless dreams, a cacophony of images that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare. The pressures of the royal life, combined with the relentless reminder of her cursed heritage, slowly eroded the boundaries of her inner world. The isolation that had marked her childhood transformed into a deep-seated loneliness that no amount of public adulation could dispel. In her private moments, the princess turned to introspection as both a refuge and a battleground. The journal in which she recorded her thoughts became a silent witness to the gradual disintegration of her once hopeful spirit. With each written word, she revealed the inner conflicts that plagued her, a conflict between the desire to rebel against a destiny imposed upon her and the fear of the unknown consequences of defiance. The pages bore the marks of a mind in turmoil, struggling to come to terms with the duality of its existence. The rebellion that grew within her was not one of overt defiance, but rather a quiet, insidious resistance. She began to challenge the traditions that had defined her life since birth, questioning the wisdom of a system that valued duty over individuality. Her thoughts, once stifled by the rigid confines of royal decorum, now flowed freely, exploring ideas of freedom, love, and the possibility of redemption. Yet, this inner revolution came at a high cost. The more she dared to dream of a different life, the more isolated she felt from the world that had been built around her. Her internal crisis deepened as she confronted the painful reality of her own identity. The legacy of inbreeding, a topic often spoken of in hushed tones and furtive glances, became an ever-present specter. In moments of introspection, she could not help but see the genetic flaws that had marred her lineage, reflected in her own features and temperament. It was as if every physical imperfection was a reminder of a deeper, more insidious curse. A curse that had been passed down through generations like a family heirloom of sorrow. The princess's mind became a labyrinth of conflicting emotions. On one side, there was a fierce determination to claim her individuality and reject the oppressive traditions that had defined her life. On the other, there was a paralyzing fear, a fear that the curse of her ancestry was inescapable, that no matter how far she strayed from the path laid out for her, the shadows of her lineage would always follow. This constant tug of war left her emotionally exhausted, teetering on the brink of a psychological breakdown. Her relationships, already strained by the rigid expectations of royalty, began to suffer under the weight of her inner turmoil. The isolation she felt was no longer merely a physical separation from the outside world. It was a deep, internal chasm that grew wider with every passing day. Friends and confidants could not penetrate the fortress of her pain, and even those who cared for her found themselves at a loss when faced with the storm of her emotions. In this state of profound loneliness, the princess began to question whether she was ever truly capable of finding solace or understanding in a world that seemed determined to keep her confined.
Let exploit a tragic turning point in her life.
No life steeped in tragedy can continue indefinitely without reaching a moment of irreversible change. A moment when the accumulated weight of destiny and despair becomes too much to bear. For the princess, this defining moment came unexpectedly during a grand state celebration meant to showcase the splendor of her lineage. It was an event that should have been filled with joy and pride, but instead became the catalyst for a public and deeply personal crisis. The palace was adorned with the finest decorations, and the courtiers, dignitaries, and foreign guests marveled at the opulence of the occasion. Yet behind the polished smiles and meticulously arranged festivities, the princess felt a profound disconnection from the life that was expected of her. In the midst of the celebration, a heated argument broke out between influential members of the court. A confrontation that exposed long-held grievances and unspoken resentments about the legacy of the royal family. As the voices grew louder and the conflict escalated, the princess found herself at the center of an emotional maelstrom. In that fraught moment, the full weight of her inherited destiny crashed upon her. The public scandal that erupted that evening was more than a political debacle. It was the breaking point for her already fragile psyche. Overwhelmed by the realization that she could no longer hide behind the veneer of royal decorum, the princess experienced a cathartic eruption of emotion. Tears streamed down her face as she stood on the balcony, looking out over a sea of faces that no longer seemed capable of understanding the true extent of her inner torment. That night, under the indifferent gaze of the stars, she reached a psychological breaking point. The carefully constructed facade of a royal daughter shattered, revealing the raw, unfiltered pain of a soul burdened by the sins of its past. The scandal marked not only the beginning of her public undoing, but also the start of an internal descent into a darkness from which she feared there was no return. In the painful silence that followed the chaos of the evening, the princess was forced to confront a question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Was it possible to ever escape the chains of destiny?
Let's talk about the legacy and lingering shadows she left behind.
In the days, weeks, and years that followed the defining night, the princess's life took on an even more tragic and introspective tone. The scandal had left deep wounds in the fabric of the royal court, and her personal life became a series of retreats into isolation and introspection. The public, ever hungry for scandal and drama, whispered behind closed doors, labeling her as a broken figure, a tragic symbol of a cursed legacy. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of the chaos, there was also a sense of profound transformation. The princess, stripped of the pretense of regal perfection, began to confront the painful realities of her existence. She sought refuge in solitude, spending long hours wandering the palace gardens and the quiet halls, where echoes of the past resonated with every step. In these moments of solitude, she allowed herself to feel the full spectrum of her emotions: grief, anger, despair, and even fleeting moments of hope. Her internal journey was not one of simple resignation, however. Despite the overwhelming darkness, there emerged within her a fragile determination to reclaim her identity from the clutches of a cursed past. The scars of her genetic legacy and the harsh realities of royal life became both a burden and a source of strength, a reminder that while the past could shape her, it did not have to define her future. In quiet letters and secret meetings with sympathetic confidants, the princess began to explore ideas of reform, change, and the possibility of redemption for herself and her beleaguered family. But the legacy of her lineage was a persistent and unyielding force. Even as she sought to redefine herself, the shadow of inbreeding and the resulting physical and emotional ailments loomed large. Her health began to decline, and the whispers about the curse that had haunted her family for generations took on a more ominous tone. The princess's struggles became a mirror for the wider decline of a dynasty that had once been the pride of a nation. In her frailty, the public saw not only the personal tragedy of one woman but also the slow decay of an institution built on ancient traditions and forbidden secrets. As time passed, the psychological toll of her life's journey deepened. The princess became increasingly introspective, her once hopeful dreams replaced by a resigned melancholy. She would often speak to trusted friends and even to the empty night sky about the seeming inevitability of her fate. In these intimate moments, the questions that had haunted her for decades came to the fore. Was there any escape from a destiny written in blood and sorrow? Could the human spirit ever triumph over the cumulative weight of ancestral misfortune? The legacy she left behind was a complex tapestry of loss and lingering hope. For many, her story was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the past can be an unyielding master over the present. Yet, for others, it was a call to challenge the old ways and seek a future where identity was not shackled by heritage. In the quiet twilight of her life, as the princess faced her final days, she became both a victim and a symbol, a tragic figure whose inner battle resonated with anyone who has ever questioned the fairness of fate.
Now it is time to reflect on her journey in totality.
The life of Spain's inbred princess is a story that lingers long after the final chapter has been written. It is a psychological history that forces us to ask difficult questions about the forces that shape our lives, about the interplay of genetics, family legacy, and personal choice. Throughout her journey, from the fateful night of her birth to the bitter end of her public and private undoing, the princess's story was one of both profound tragedy and quiet defiance. Her life compels us to reflect on the notion of destiny. Was she merely a victim of her genetic inheritance, a pawn in a game played by centuries-old traditions? Or was there within her the spark of free will, a spark that, despite overwhelming odds, dared to challenge a predetermined fate? The psychological journey of the princess is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when burdened by the heaviest of legacies. Today, as we look back on her life, we are reminded that every individual is shaped by a complex tapestry of influences. The pain of the past may never fully fade, but it is in our questioning, our defiance, and our willingness to seek a better future that we find the true measure of our humanity. The princess's struggle is not just a royal tragedy. It is a mirror in which we see our own battles against forces without speed to define us, or emotional, that seek to define us. In her final moments, as the princess looked out over the kingdom she could never fully embrace, she whispered a question to the night. Is it possible to break free from the chains of destiny? Her answer, though lost in the echoes of time, lives on in the hearts of those who dare to challenge the inevitability of the past. It is a call to look beyond the limitations imposed by history, to seek in ourselves the strength to forge a future that is truly our own. As you close this account, take a moment to reflect. How much of who we are is determined by our lineage, and how much can we change through the choices we make? The tragic life of Spain's inbred princess invites us to confront these questions with both sorrow and hope, reminding us that even in the darkest of stories there lies the potential for a new beginning. The tragic tale of Spain's inbred princess is just one of the many captivating stories we uncover. At Stories of Legends, we bring history to life with emotional, powerful, and eye-opening narratives that will leave you speechless. Subscribe now to explore the hidden past, legendary figures, and untold mysteries that shape the world. Join the conversation. Your thoughts matter. Like, comment, and share to keep history alive. Don't just watch history, experience it. Hit that subscribe button now and become part of the legend.